We're going to start the topic with the affirmative action issue. But before we get started, I want to tell a personal story. First of all, I define myself as an Afro-Latino Caribbean man. I'm walking the streets of Houston. I'm just a black man. I went to the University of Texas back in the 80s. I must say I was very comfortable at the University of Texas, but I went through a lot of tribulations simply because of my hue, my color, my race, whatever you want to call it. By the way, I want folks to understand, I think race is a stupid thing because the reality is one's pigmentation has little to do with one's intellect, biology, or anything else. Any scientist would tell you that. That's a fact. Now, our economic system depended on splitting people up, people being against each other. We could go through a lot of histories that right now is not germane to this particular discussion, but I'd like you to take at face value that particular statement that I said. Race is a stupid thing. Race has no value. We have instituted race so that a few on top can stay powerful. We instituted race and a lot of the other isms for that particular reasons. Now, at the University of Texas, I got into many issues with professors, etc. The way papers were graded and all of that I could categorically, I'm not saying playing a race card or anything like that. I could categorically prove these issues were racially based. I had some great white friends at the University of Texas who stopped me many a times in my hothead days from getting into trouble because, again, meaning, maybe confronting a teacher a professor in the wrong way, etc. These guys like Egberto, chill out. We understand. Look, we're with you. We understand. We've got your back. So let me just tell you on face value, those are issues that I went through. Now, when it comes to affirmative action, when I went to the University of Texas, the school was a very, very monolithically white school. I loved the school. The school is a great school, etc. But one of the things that really irked me many a times is that most of the white kids that were at that school believed that I was there because of this thing called affirmative action. So I was never looked at by most as somebody who earned the right to be at the top public university in Texas. I was always looked at as the affirmative hire, if you will, the affirmative student there. That plays a part on one's psyche if one's psyche isn't strong enough. It can have issues to believe, well, look, I do my work. I am smart. I am all these things. But still, the body generally thinks you're only there because some external force says that somebody with your hue, with your color, with your race needs to be there. As such, when I left the University of Texas, I hated affirmative action. This black dude, when he left the University of Texas, hated affirmative action. I got several offers for jobs when I left the University of Texas. And by the way, my scores at UT weren't exceptional because, of course, I worked 40 hours a week as I went to school as well. I never did homeworks. In many classes, homeworks was 25% of the class. I fudged it. But anyhow, I knew the material very well. I did very well comparatively. When I got into the workforce, this was my experience. I got a job in Louisiana, run trucks because of issues with my back. They told me, after all, we can't keep you on, but go to Houston and interview for this job. My first experience were twofold. The job that I interviewed for, on paper, I was not qualified for. It was for a senior programmer analyst that while I did a lot of programming back in school, in fact, I wrote a program to control a ship in the middle of the ocean in Fortran with the windage and waves and that sort of stuff. I didn't have the title Master's in Computer Science. After I got that interview with this great woman who herself was fighting her way in the good old boy network in the oil industry, She heard the whole history. She asked the right questions. She made sure that, oh my God, can you really do this job? And she was enthralled, and she went to the VP of the organization and said, this is the guy that I want to do this job. It was for a system, TDS-11, never forgot the name of the system, on a PDP-11 computer system. Anyhow, after feeling like I got the luck of the draw, that this woman really thought that I could do this job and she wanted to hire me, my second experience was going into the office of the VP of this particular organization, sitting down, him closing the door behind me, and it just felt weird. And he looked and he said, and I won't use her name, but he said, she likes you. She thinks you are going to excel at this job. I don't know why, but I want to tell you something, man to man. You got 6 months. And if you don't make it, I don't want to hear a damn thing about affirmative action. That was my entry into the workforce in the United States of America. A 22-year-old kid, and notice I said kid, green behind the ear. 22-year-old. That was my introduction to the system. Suffice it to say, it was a load. I am sitting down there, and it wasn't like, welcome to the corporation. It wasn't, welcome to a great company to do great things, that was not my entry into the company. So as you can imagine, I hated affirmative action even more, because now I understood that I'm in that job and what it was going to mean to me as far as how my peers were going to look at me. That 6-month project was completed in its full potential successfully in 2 months. The lady who said she saw that I could do the job walked into my office and said, let me tell you something. Forget all the crap this guy told you. You are here, brother. Well, she didn't say brother, but she said you are here, and moved on from there. But all the while, I always felt that pressure that everybody looking at me before they saw my work thought I was there solely for affirmative action. I hated it. I hated affirmative action. We were young. We used to have all these great parties, and there are times I was a bartender, even though I didn't drink, but we'd have these big parties and we'll get into big arguments about political issues and all of that. And I was the one that they would always call a Republican. I was never associated with either Republicans or Democrats, but they would call me a Republican because I had this anti-affirmative action thing on my shoulder, because I hated that is how I was going to be judged. So this guy, one time, he was working for Channel 13, and he was a reporter for Channel 13. They had issues at 13 with minority reporters and that kind of stuff. And then he came to me and he said, you are an idiot. You are a buffoon. And he ragged me, and he said, I'm tell you what, whenever you change your mind, you give me a call. And I remember when I changed my mind. I don't remember the exact flip point, but I remember thinking, oh my God, the reason I got into the University of Texas was, in fact, affirmative action. The reason I even got the job at that company was because of affirmative action. It's not that I couldn't do the job. It's not that I wasn't qualified for the job. It's not that I wasn't smart enough for the University of Texas and they made that choice to come and pick me up. But it was that affirmative action said, we cannot, just because the managers and the educators or whatever are more comfortable with people who look like them, only consider people who look like them. And the second thing, in a pool of, let's say, white people, where there will always be enough white people to qualify for any one job, there are white people who will keep another white person out of a job because there are only X amount of slots, just as a qualified black person would have kept a qualified white person out of a job. In other words, that white person that was qualified but wasn't chosen over that black person, or that same white person could probably not have been chosen because of another white person. It's the thing about having X amount of slots and a hell of a lot of people going after that slots, and affirmative action saying, look, in a system where it has always been biased against the other, we have to create structures that in that pool of qualified people, we can have diversity in this organization. It's a systemic issue, but in solving the systemic issue, you don't want to bring unqualified people in. Why do I make that distinction now? What many corporations have done is, as they are doing their hires, and this goes for universities, I'm doing it from a perspective of corporations, but it goes with universities as well. As they are doing their hires, they don't necessarily seek that qualified person, that qualified BIPOC. And what does that do to that white person who was qualified for that job, but that BIPOC, that black person, that Latino person who was less qualified got the job? It creates an anti-affirmative action stance based on a lot of what my own experience was, that backlash, thinking you are only there because of the color of your skin, because of your ethnicity, and not because you, like anybody else, deserve to be there. Every job that I've had before I went solo, and by the way, I only worked for corporate America for 5 years. I could take it no longer and form my own software company. The reason affirmative action gets that bad act is on purpose. It wasn't the affirmative action that was the issue. The issue was always those who are implementing affirmative action, not doing what the work. And many of the work that wasn't done had to do with the intrinsic racism of the people who are doing the interview proper. Let me give an example. Many a times I would be qualified for a job, but because of racism of the person who is directing the job, they wouldn't want you for the problem as, well, since you know something, I definitely don't want a BIPOC in here who is going to show me up, as if that is not going to happen with a non-BIPOC showing this particular person up. And too often what that means is that the most qualified BIPOC, black person, Latino person, indigenous person, doesn't get selected because not of affirmative action, but because of that person's own misgivings, that person's own implicit racism, prejudice, or otherwise. And that screws the whole pot up. So now what we get is many white people wouldn't just come out and say, I hate affirmative action because I feel it discriminates against me. I mean, a lot of folks have been made to believe that is what happens. They don't say that if it's a white person getting that job, that kicked them out of the job, because again, that's not the framing that those demagogues are going to use. The framing that real racist prejudice folks are going to do to get good people on their side, good white people on their side, good everybody on their side, is to point out you lost your job because they gave it to some unqualified other. So when I find white folks that are against affirmative action, my first point of view isn't to say, you're racist to believe that. It's to say, there goes our efficient system that creates racist. Again, the race is not a real thing, but my God, it has created real problems by design. A lot of folks don't like to hear me say that race is a stupid thing or whatever, because people have this great attachment to that stupid color thing. They have that great attachment to supremacy of the way you look, when in reality, there are very few people who are simply teaching you to think that way so that they can have full control with you fighting everything else, but fighting that which holds you down. It's not affirmative action that has hold people down. If you go into a university, there's this thing known as legacy enrollment. In other words, you get a push ahead. When I worked on the board of Move to Amend, we would create skits for people to do to show how people move along in life, the average person. And we'll line a completely multicultural group, and we will ask about 10 questions about their life situation and how things happened in their lives. And we would say things like, one step forward if this happened in your life, where you're at if this happened in your life, or take one step backwards if this happened in your life. And after we did that test, it was a graphical way to show how systemic racism, systemic prejudice has worked in this country. When the Supreme Court made that change, notice it had no effect on things like legacy enrollments. Legacy enrollment says if you were a part of this institution, your parents, that is, you will get an edge up on everybody else who's applying for that institution, right? So therefore, there are two things that legacy does, right? Legacy hurts the other white qualified people, just like the other white qualified people think that getting a notch for being a BIPOC to get into that institution holds a pool of qualified white people out. It's another edge that you get up, right? But I have yet to see too many people complain about the legacy issue. But I will add one thing to the legacy issue. The legacy issue is also a racist issue. And how is the legacy issue racist? The University of Texas, my school, never allowed BIPOCs in there. Black people, Latinos, other people of color could not go to the University of Texas. What that means is that the vast majority, if not all, of the legacy points, in other words, the advantage you get from being a legacy person, only applied to white people. So there you go, right? A legacy things that right now the Supreme Court did nothing about. Built into that legacy program is implicit, systemic racism. Why? Because at the time these legacy programs came into the fold, black folks couldn't go to those universities. As such, what that meant, again, is within that structure proper, within the legacy structure proper, it is implicitly racist because all those points for legacy goes to one group of folk. The whole issue here is the Supreme Court's in adapting the fallacy about affirmative being a racist entity. In other words, discriminating against white people, being using race to get folks into the college makes absolutely no sense. And what it really does is what we see is happening in California. What occurred is they went completely race neutral. And what happened immediately is their black population fell by 44%. Their indigenous population fell by 90%. This wasn't a Supreme Court decision in California. It was the people of California, after being miseducated by racists on what these issues really are. So do I blame the average citizens of California? No, I don't. I blame ill education, miseducation. And why am I honored to be having a platform on a place like KPFT or on the internet or anywhere else? Because without any stresses, without any external forces, we can honestly have a discourse. We can honestly discuss what these issues really are and not how the plutocracy, the corporatocracy would try to use it to create divisions among us. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.